A man checks into a hotel. A few days later, he is found dead. The door is locked from the inside, no fingerprints, and his last words are, "No one is to blame." A man checks into a hotel, and just days later, he is found dead. Locked room, no fingerprints. His final words, "No one is to blame." It was the summer of 1935 in Kansas City, Missouri. The streets buzzed with the hum of streetcars and the chatter of evening crowds, neon signs flickering in the warm air. Yet in one quiet corner, a hotel hid a mystery that would baffle investigators for decades. Room 1046. The story begins not with screams, but with a simple arrival. On the evening of July 10th, a man walked into the President Hotel carrying a small suitcase, neatly dressed, blending perfectly into the busy lobby. He approached the front desk, requested a room for a few nights, and was handed a brass key for room 1046. He nodded, smiled faintly, and disappeared down the dimly lit corridor, leaving behind no hint of the horror that awaited. Staff later recalled that he seemed polite but distant, as if his thoughts were elsewhere, locked inside a mind that no one could reach. That first night passed without incident. He returned late, quietly, and no one saw him leave again until the next morning, when a maid noted the door was shut, the key hanging neatly on the counter. Days went by. Guests passed him in the hallway, noting his strange habits. He never spoke much, spent hours alone in his room, sometimes pacing, sometimes staring at the walls. He ordered food, but rarely touched it, and his handwriting in hotel ledgers was meticulous, almost obsessive. By July 13th, concern began to rise. He had not been seen leaving for meals, not even for a walk. Staff knocked on the door, received no answer. Finally, after repeated attempts, the hotel manager and a maintenance worker forced entry. Inside, they found the man dead on the floor, his body contorted in a position that seemed unnatural, almost staged. Blood stained his clothing, yet there were no signs of struggle. The window was locked, the door bolted from the inside. On the nightstand, a note was scrawled, "No one is to blame." There were no fingerprints other than his own, no signs of forced entry. The room was orderly, eerily so, as if someone had carefully arranged the scene before leaving. Investigators scoured the hotel, interviewed every guest, every employee. They found nothing, no trace of another person, no indication of poison, no motive, no explanation. The city whispered rumors. Was it suicide, a botched crime, or something far stranger? Some swore they heard faint whispers through the walls, shadows moving in corners that should have been empty. The case became a sensation, yet each lead ended in a dead end. Authorities were baffled. For decades, the death of the occupant of room 1046 remained unsolved. Every piece of evidence seemed to mock investigators, pointing everywhere and nowhere at once. Even today, the room is remembered as a place where reality itself seemed to pause, leaving only fear, curiosity, and a question that refuses to fade. What really happened behind that locked door? And now, the question remains for you. If you were standing outside room 1046 that night, hearing nothing but silence, what would you have done? The discovery of the man's body in room 1046 sent ripples through Kansas City, and soon the press descended upon the President Hotel like vultures drawn to a carcass. Reporters filled their columns with speculation, painting the mysterious guest as a man with secrets, a stranger who vanished into a locked room only to be found dead. Yet for all the attention, the truth remained elusive. Investigators combed the room, their flashlights cutting through the shadows, examining every corner with painstaking care. The furniture was undisturbed, the bed neatly made, the small suitcase still in its corner, closed as if untouched since the man's arrival. On the walls, faint marks suggested he had paced for hours, his anxiety perhaps building to a crescendo that no one could witness. A diary, partially hidden beneath the mattress, contained entries that hinted at paranoia, fear, and a sense of being watched. Lines like "they are always near" and "I cannot trust the shadows" gave the impression that the man felt pursued, though by whom, or by what, remained unknown. Yet when investigators scoured the hotel and surrounding streets, they found no one. There were no footprints leading to the building late at night, no secret entrances, no neighbors reporting strange comings and goings. It was as though the man's torment existed solely within the walls of room 1046, invisible to the outside world. The coroner examined the body, seeking any trace of poison, trauma, or disease, but the results were inconclusive. The cause of death was ambiguous. Some suggested strangulation, others thought heart failure, while a few whispered of supernatural influence, citing the man's note that cryptically declared, "No one is to blame." Authorities were left with a scene that defied logic. The room was sealed from the inside, yet the man was dead, and nothing, no weapon, no intruder, no struggle, explained how it happened. The hotel staff recounted their observations in hushed, almost fearful tones. The bellboy remembered seeing the man take long walks down the corridor, muttering to himself. The maid spoke of strange odors in the room, faintly metallic, that appeared and disappeared without cause. Even the hotel manager, a pragmatic man accustomed to handling the eccentricities of guests, admitted that something about room 1046 unsettled him, though he could not articulate why. Rumors began to swirl. Some claimed that the man had been a gambler who owed dangerous debts, that perhaps some enforcer had found a way inside and then vanished as mysteriously as he appeared. Others suggested espionage, that the guest was a spy carrying secrets worth killing for. Yet the evidence supported none of these theories. The room offered no clue. The man's past remained largely untraceable, and his final note provided no explanation. As the city speculated, investigators turned to psychology. Could it have been a case of extreme paranoia or self-inflicted harm? The man's diary hinted at deep-seated fears, a mind unraveling under invisible pressures. Yet even the most sympathetic reading of his writings could not account for the locked door, the lack of fingerprints, and the strange position of his body, which suggested a violent convulsion or struggle that had left no trace. Attempts to reconstruct the scene only deepened the mystery. Experts tried different scenarios: a hidden mechanism in the room, accidental entanglement with furniture, poisoning through undetectable means. Every theory failed under scrutiny. Photographs taken of the room showed no anomalies, no signs of tampering, nothing that could indicate a second presence. It was as if the walls themselves were guarding their secret. Outside observers speculated endlessly. Was it a perfect murder executed by someone with knowledge beyond the ordinary? Or had the man fallen victim to his own fears, trapped in a psychological labyrinth that ended with his death? Even in local bars and newspapers, the story became legend, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Witnesses came forward claiming to see shadows moving behind curtains, to hear whispers from the hallway, to smell strange metallic scents in the night. Though none of these accounts could be verified, they added layers to the enigma, fueling both fear and fascination. Yet for all the conjecture, no one could offer definitive answers. Room 1046 became infamous, a name whispered with trepidation. Some guests refused to stay there. Staff were wary of entering, and the building itself seemed to carry the weight of what had occurred within its walls. Over the years, investigators returned, some hoping to apply new forensic methods, others simply drawn by the allure of a case unsolved. Each time, the room yielded nothing. Every fingerprint had been cataloged, every inch of space scanned, yet no clue surfaced. The hotel eventually changed ownership, renovated, and even renamed, but those who knew its history claimed the air around the old 1046 still carried an oppressive, unexplained tension. The man's identity remained shrouded in mystery. Records were incomplete, and though he was tentatively identified as a traveler from out of town, his past, his motivations, and his connections remained obscure. Without context, every theory was speculative, every conclusion tentative. Investigators could only chronicle the facts. A man checks into a hotel, disappears into a locked room, is later found dead, with a cryptic note, no evidence of a second party, and no discernible cause. The scene defied logic, reason, and conventional explanation, leaving a trail of questions with no answers. And so the mystery of room 1046 endured, a chilling reminder of the unknown. Even now, the story evokes unease, as if the walls themselves remember the events, whispering of fear, isolation, and a death that no one can explain. And now, we leave you with a question. If you were alone in that room, staring at the locked door, hearing nothing but silence, what would you do next? Could you face the possibility that some mysteries are not meant to be solved? As days turned into weeks after the discovery in room 1046, the story took on a life of its own, growing stranger with each retelling. The hotel became a magnet for curiosity seekers, journalists, and amateur detectives, all drawn by the allure of a mystery that seemed to defy explanation. Yet, despite the influx of attention, the facts remained chillingly consistent. A man dead in a locked room, no sign of struggle, no fingerprints beyond his own, and a note that simply read, "No one is to blame." The room itself became a focal point of intrigue. Investigators returned multiple times, measuring every angle, examining every inch of the furniture, the carpet, and the walls. Nothing seemed out of place, yet something about the environment appeared off. Subtle anomalies puzzled even the most seasoned detectives. A faint discoloration along the edge of the carpet suggested repeated pacing in the same spot. A small scratch near the doorknob seemed deliberate, though it was too slight to explain forced entry. And, most unsettling of all, the air in the room was described by those who entered as oppressive, thick, almost suffocating, as if the space itself carried a memory of whatever had occurred there. The man's diary, recovered by investigators, became a key piece of the puzzle. Its pages were filled with increasingly erratic entries, fragmented thoughts that hinted at fear, obsession, and a growing paranoia. Lines such as "They are here," "I cannot hide," or "The walls watch me, I hear them whisper," suggested a mind unraveling under invisible pressure. Investigators struggled to interpret these writings. Was he tormented by a person unseen, or had he descended into a psychotic state? Yet, even a psychological explanation could not account for the locked door and the absence of any physical evidence of another presence. Rumors circulated about the man's identity, adding layers to the enigma. Some claimed he was a drifter, moving from city to city, leaving behind confusion and occasional distress wherever he went. Others suggested he was a man of secret dealings, perhaps involved in gambling, espionage, or illicit affairs. Yet no tangible evidence supported any of these theories. The man's past was as opaque as the circumstances of his death. Friends, family, or associates could not be traced. He existed in public records only as a name on a ledger, a guest in room 1046. Local legend grew. Hotel staff shared stories that, at first glance, seemed trivial but carried an undercurrent of unease. The bellboy remembered hearing scratching noises at odd hours, though the source was never found. The maid spoke of fleeting shadows at the edges of her vision when cleaning the room. One employee claimed that, upon entering, he felt an intense chill, like a presence pressing against him, though he saw nothing. These accounts were dismissed by skeptics as overactive imaginations, the product of superstition or the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. Yet the consistency of the reports across different witnesses lent them a haunting credibility. Investigators explored every possible physical explanation. Could the man have access to a hidden compartment, a secret passage, a mechanism within the building itself? They measured walls, examined floorboards, tested locks and windows. Every attempt to recreate the circumstances of his death failed. There was no hidden entrance, no contraption, no trick that could explain the locked room and the absence of another presence. Even forensic techniques of the time were exhausted. When authorities consulted psychologists, detectives, and criminologists, no single theory satisfied all the facts. Suicide seemed possible, yet the position of the body and the note left behind challenged conventional reasoning. Homicide was equally problematic. No intruder could have entered or left without leaving a trace. Accidental death? Unlikely. The man's meticulous habits and the apparent order of the room suggested he was aware, in some sense, of his surroundings. Public fascination intensified. Newspapers printed sensational accounts, embellishing the facts with imagined dialogues and conjectures. Readers speculated endlessly. Was the man a victim of a sinister plot, a psychic attack, or had he succumbed to some unknown force lurking within the hotel walls? Each theory only deepened the mystery, as the physical evidence refused to support any explanation. Over time, the room became almost legendary. Guests deliberately avoided it, and staff reported an almost palpable tension when required to enter. Some claimed the brass key itself seemed to carry an aura of unease, a weight that pressed on the hand holding it. Those who lingered in the lobby would glance up at the corridor, half expecting to see a shadow behind the door, yet the hallway remained empty. The man's death even inspired other investigations into mysterious hotel incidents across the country, but none matched the baffling specifics of room 1046. It remained singular in its strangeness. Yet what made it truly chilling was not the speculation, nor the untraceable identity of the guest, nor the unexplainable circumstances. It was the lingering presence of unanswered questions. How could a man die alone in a room, without any visible cause, leaving behind no evidence save his own note? What force, human or otherwise, could orchestrate such a perfect enigma? Investigators returned again and again, each time confronting the same frustration. All doors locked from the inside, no signs of tampering, no evidence of another being present. The diary offered hints, but no solutions. The room itself provided no answers, and the city's imagination raced ahead of reality. Even today, decades later, the mystery of room 1046 continues to unsettle those who learn of it. Forensic advances, psychological theories, and investigative techniques have changed dramatically since 1935, yet the death remains a riddle resistant to explanation. The room, the note, the man's past, all continue to provoke speculation. And now, we ask you, if you were an investigator faced with the empty room, the cryptic diary, and the locked door, what would you believe? Would you trust reason, fear, or something else entirely? Could you confront the possibility that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, leaving only shadows and whispers behind? As the weeks turned into months, the mystery of room 1046 began to cast a shadow over the President Hotel that no amount of renovations or management changes could erase. The hotel, once a bustling haven for travelers, now carried an undercurrent of fear, an invisible weight that pressed upon anyone who lingered too long in its hallways. Employees who had once scoffed at rumors found themselves hesitating before knocking on doors, sensing an unseen presence in the air. Guests whispered among themselves about the locked room, about the man who had vanished into it only to be found dead, and about the strange note that declared, "No one is to blame." Even seasoned detectives described an unshakable unease when they stepped inside the corridor, an almost tangible tension that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. Investigators focused not just on the physical evidence, but on the psychology of the space itself. The man had spent hours alone in the room, pacing and writing, his mind unraveling in ways that were partially documented in the diary left behind. Some entries hinted at a creeping paranoia, a belief that unseen forces were observing him. "They watch me," he wrote. "I feel them behind the walls, listening, waiting." While no one could verify these claims, the consistency of his writings suggested a mind on the edge, someone who sensed danger even when no one else could. Yet the most perplexing element remained the locked door. The brass doorknob, the key, the bolts, all had been examined, tested, and found intact. No hidden mechanism could explain how another person might have entered or left the room. Experts attempted elaborate reconstructions, using dummies, strings, and even mirrors to detect secret passages, but each experiment ended in frustration. The room resisted explanation, as if it were intentionally guarding its secret. Small details, initially dismissed as insignificant, began to acquire a sinister weight. A scratch on the wooden floor, faint but deliberate, suggested repeated movement in the same pattern. The stain on the carpet, dark and metallic in hue, was never properly identified. The hotel's ventilation system was examined, yet no trace of poison, gas, or chemical could account for the death. It was as if the room itself had conspired to create a perfect, inexplicable scene. Journalists and local citizens added layers to the story, embellishing the facts with every retelling. Shadows behind curtains, whispers in the hallway, fleeting shapes at the edge of vision. All were described, though none were verified. Witnesses, including hotel staff, swore they felt the room's oppressive presence long after the man's death. Some claimed that when they passed by room 1046, they could hear a faint scratching or a whisper carried through the walls. Others reported a sudden drop in temperature, a chill that seemed to emanate from nowhere. These accounts, while anecdotal, contributed to an atmosphere of dread that enveloped the building, making room 1046 a name spoken with caution, even fear. Meanwhile, the man's identity remained enigmatic. Efforts to trace his past proved nearly impossible. He left no family records, no work history, no connections that could shed light on his circumstances. Some suggested he had purposefully erased his identity, a man with secrets worth killing for, or perhaps secrets worth hiding even from himself. The diary offered glimpses of his inner life, but it was fragmented, sometimes illegible, and occasionally contradictory. He wrote of paranoia, fear, and an unseen presence. Yet he also expressed moments of calm, even optimism. The oscillation between clarity and madness made it impossible to determine whether his death was the result of external forces or a descent into psychosis. Investigators were left with a paradox. The scene was meticulously orderly, yet deeply disturbing. The door locked from the inside, no fingerprints except his own, no signs of struggle, no visible poison or weapon. The diary suggested mental distress, yet could it fully account for the physical impossibility of his demise? Skeptics proposed suicide, accidental self-harm, or even hallucination-induced behavior. But the position of the body, the note, and the apparent care with which he had maintained his surroundings undermined these theories. The hotel management, meanwhile, faced a dilemma. They wanted to reassure guests, to downplay the story, yet the legend of room 1046 drew attention that could not be ignored. For decades afterward, visitors would ask for the haunted room, though few ever stayed there. The corridors were quiet, almost too quiet, and employees reported a lingering sense of something watching, an invisible weight pressing against the walls. Psychologists and criminologists debated endlessly. Could the man's mind have created circumstances that mimicked an impossible death? Could he have inadvertently caused his own demise through a combination of stress, fear, and unseen hazards in the room? Or was there a calculated intervention, someone or something orchestrating the event with precision beyond human understanding? Every answer seemed to raise more questions than it solved. By the time the years passed, room 1046 had become a symbol of fear, obsession, and the unknowable. Even today, when the building is remembered or referenced in discussions of unsolved mysteries, it carries with it an almost tangible tension. Visitors speak in hushed tones, describing a chill, a heaviness, an intangible presence that lingers where the man once walked, wrote, and ultimately died. The climax of a story is almost impossible to convey without a sense of dread. The man alone, in his room, the door locked, his diary in hand, and the note declaring absolution, no one is to blame, creates an image of horror that is both intimate and incomprehensible. No one witnessed the final moments, yet the room itself seems to echo them, preserved in time, untouched, and unknowable. And so, the mystery continues. The story of room 1046 challenges everything we think we know about death, space, and the limits of human understanding. It confronts us with the chilling possibility that some events cannot be explained, Some spaces retain memories we cannot perceive, and some deaths remain unsolved, even decades later. And now, we leave you with this question. If you were in that room, surrounded by silence and shadows, could you trust what you saw and heard? Would you flee in fear, or remain to confront the impossible? Could you accept that some mysteries are designed not to be solved, and that the truth might be forever beyond your grasp? Time seemed to stretch and distort in room 1046, as if the very air inside had absorbed the tension, the fear, and the unknown events that had transpired. Investigators returned again and again, but the room resisted every attempt to explain its mystery. Even decades later, it remained a locus of unanswered questions. On that fateful night in July 1935, the man, anonymously registered, carrying nothing more than a small suitcase, entered the room, unaware that he was stepping into a narrative that would defy logic and reason for generations. He moved quietly, as if conscious of some unseen audience, and yet no one observed him directly beyond the fleeting glimpses captured by hotel staff. The day he was discovered dead, the scene presented a paradox that stunned everyone who saw it. His body lay in a position that suggested both sudden collapse and deliberate placement, a contortion that seemed to resist natural explanation. The note, "No one is to blame," was scrawled hastily, yet with a precision that hinted at a calm mind in its final moments, as though he had understood something no one else could. In the months following the discovery, investigators meticulously examined every possible angle. They analyzed the door, the locks, and the brass key, all intact and functioning perfectly. Windows were tested. The room was sealed from the inside. Fingerprints revealed only the deceased's. No signs of struggle, no traces of a second presence. Every conceivable method of entry or exit was ruled out. Experts in psychology, criminal investigation, and even mechanical engineering offered theories. Perhaps he had staged his own death. Perhaps a hidden mechanism or chemical induced it. Perhaps he suffered from acute paranoia, hallucinations, or a psychosomatic collapse. But each explanation faltered under scrutiny. The position of his body, the absence of evidence, the cryptic note, and the carefully maintained order of the room refused to fit any rational framework. Rumors proliferated. Some speculated the hotel itself had a secret, a hidden architecture or design that allowed impossible events. Others whispered that the man's death was a warning or punishment for something unknown, that he had attracted forces beyond comprehension. Staff recalled small anomalies that, in hindsight, appeared sinister. The bellboy remembered faint scratching at the walls, impossible to locate. The maid described a metallic odor, fleeting yet persistent. Temperature fluctuations were reported, cold spots that appeared and vanished without reason. Shadows seemed to move where no object could cast them. The diary offered clues, but only more questions. Fragmented entries described a sense of being watched, whispers through walls, and a creeping dread that seemed to follow him wherever he moved. His handwriting alternated between neat, controlled script and frantic scrawls, hinting at a mind struggling to maintain balance. And yet, there was no name, no identity beyond the ledger entry at the front desk. No connections, no history, no explanation for why he had come to Kansas City at all. Attempts to match his handwriting or traces of him in other records produced nothing. As the story of room 1046 circulated in newspapers, it acquired a life of its own. Sensationalist accounts added layers of horror. Some claimed the man had been fleeing unseen enemies, others that he had angered forces he could not comprehend. Yet the facts never changed. A man checked into a room, and a few days later, he was found dead. The door locked from the inside. No evidence of another presence. A note, "No one is to blame." Even today, forensic experts and criminologists cite it as one of the most baffling unsolved mysteries. Attempts to recreate the circumstances with modern technology, motion detectors, surveillance cameras, forensic analysis, yield nothing. Room 1046 retains its secret. Visitors who later enter the building, now under new management and with renovations, sometimes report feelings of unease, as if the air itself remembers the events. Some swear they hear faint whispers. Others note shadows that seem to linger, fleeting glimpses that vanish when observed directly. The psychological impact of the case continues to resonate. It confronts us with questions about mortality, isolation, and the limits of human understanding. Was the man's death the result of an external force or his own mind? Could a room, an ordinary physical space, somehow become a trap for a single individual, bending reality in inexplicable ways? Or was it a perfectly orchestrated event, a puzzle designed to frustrate and terrify anyone who seeks closure? Whatever the explanation, none satisfies all the facts. Room 1046 stands as a monument to the unknown, a testament to the limitations of logic and the persistence of fear. Its walls witnessed events that no one can fully describe. Its floor held a body that confounded experts, and its note remains a haunting epitaph. The story refuses to conclude, and the mystery is amplified by the absence of answers. The final image, the man alone in the room, a note in hand, the door locked, and the shadows pressing against him, is one that persists in the imagination, a scene frozen in time, unknowable and terrifying. And so, the legend endures. Room 1046 is not merely a story of a death, but a narrative about the incomprehensible, about the fragility of our understanding and the enduring power of the unknown. It is a place that invites questions but denies answers, a space that challenges reason and mocks certainty. And now, we leave you with this. If you were standing outside that locked door, hearing only silence and feeling the weight of the unknown, what would you do? Would you dare enter or step away in fear? Could you accept that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, and that some doors, once closed, may never be opened again?